Hey, this is the Moose, and I'm here with the king of the animated GIF, the admiral of Adderall, the whiz of the viz. You've seen him on Roto Grinders, Guru Elite. He's the founder of Fantasy ADHD. Welcome to the golf club, Mr. Josh ADHD.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. It's good to be here.
When you first went to Fantasy National, what stuck out to you right away, and what was your first impression?
To be honest, I was kind of blown away by the amount of data that's just right there in front of you. I mean, it's a huge table of stuff that's going on. You know, you got your strokes gain data, and you can quickly get over and see your birdies and eagles gained, bogeys avoided, and whatnot. And at first, it's a bit overwhelming, but if you just take a second, get a breath, and then start actually playing with the data a little bit, you see how powerful it really is from the start. And once you realize the power that you have at your hand after a couple of minutes of just kind of being dazed by it, you realize what a strong website it is to use.
So why do you think like fantasy golf is a good transition for people who play fantasy football?
For me, I think fantasy golf is a really good transition from football because I find it to be much less frustrating from a variance standpoint. Now, we do talk about golf having a lot of variance from a shot-to-shot basis, and this is true. But one thing we really don't have to deal with golf is sudden injury. So, football, half your roster can go out in the first half of a game just due to freak injuries, and you don't deal with that with golf. So to me, it's a lot less frustrating, and I think a lot more palatable for hardcore football players because of that. You feel like for 4 days you're still in the game a lot of the cases. And one of the good things about golf too is, especially like on DraftKings with weekend packages, is let's say you roll a Yahtzee on Thursday and Friday, you can hop right back in on Saturday, Sunday with a little bit extra information, and go back and get what you feel like you lost the first 2 days.
Perfect. What is your typical weekly process for golf, and how does FNGC fit in / save you time in that process?
So my typical weekly process for golf is a lot like football. The first thing I want to do is assess, what happened the week before and what's happened in the weeks leading up to the week that we're about to take on. So Fantasy National really helps me with that because it's got information pretty much immediately after the rounds are completed. And even during the weekend, sometimes I can go and check out and see how things have been updated. They've got the live leaderboard on Fantasy National. That's really nice. That means I don't have to pull up another website to go see what's going on. It kind of co-locates a lot of data for me. And then as I get into the week, I want to see, really deep dive on the details. And it's stuff I don't have to go get myself anymore. That used to be something I would have to do on my own. And Fantasy National gives me the ability to not have to go do that work anymore. Somebody's doing it for me, and it's fantastic. It's all the data I would go get anyway, and that allows me to save a lot of time not having to dig it up myself. I love that.
Users will be able to see you got your screen up here. So tell me, like, when you first get into Fantasy National, what's the first thing that you kind of do?
For me, the first thing I want to do is just kind of get the lay of the land. So I'm going to go and typically I will actually pare down the number of rounds in the previous history down to 36 from 50. So you come to the website, it's set at 50. That's right around the last 12 events. I try to get that down a little bit. I want to know a little bit more recent history. So I'll go ahead and the first thing I do is get it down to 36 rounds, the last 9 events, and let it see how it deals with the information.
What stat categories you kind of start looking at?
For me, I always go and I'll try to see what the course is going to be like. So this week we're looking at BMW Championship. We're playing it at Conway Farms. So I know Conway Farms is bent grass, and I know that because I can look at tournament history on the website, and that's pretty handy right here. You just click it, bang, it pops up, and it shows me where the course where a course has been played the last few years. So I know it's bent grass. So I'm going to go ahead and pare down my information, and you can see I have it pre-selected here. I've got bent greens, and I also have POA greens up here because POA and bent are a little bit similar in that they're played in the same climates. So the same players tend to excel in those type of greens versus players, from the south, southeast that play on Bermuda primarily. So I'll go ahead and get my greens kind of narrowed down. And then I worry about, I want to know what guys are doing around the greens. So I get a quick sort and say, okay, well, who over the last, let's say, 9 events on this type of greens and this type of grass, the rough, whatnot, what are they doing around the greens? Because guys aren't going to be maybe 100% accurate every week when they're trying to approach. And so when they get in a little bit of trouble, who's going to be able to bail themselves out?
Josh, how do you feel like ownership impacts golf as opposed to football? Or
for me, from an ownership standpoint, I compare it a little bit to football because you obviously don't want to be too heavy on chalk. Yeah, especially if you're in a tournament, you want to, you have to be able to differentiate yourself from the crowd. So I typically try to look at players that are below, let's say, at like 10% to make sure I'm going to differentiate myself. If I'm looking at guys that are going to be upwards 25, I'm not going to fill all 6 slots with those guys. And the reason I do that is you can't win a GPP if you got the same roster that everybody else has. So if I favorite some guys and I find that I'm kind of in the chalk range with everybody, I'm going to go back and look down the list here and see out of my non-favorites who's looking to be pretty low owned. So, we look here and we see Cantlay, who's playing really good lately. Right now he's only calculated right at 9.9%. So that's a guy I'm probably going to look at, even though he's been favorited 22%. I'm still going to probably add him because we think his ownership is going to be a lot lower just because he's not as popular a name with the crowd as is with Fantasy National users. So obviously folks on Fantasy National are going to favorite Cantlay because they've got all this data to work with. They understand that Cantlay's playing fantastic the last couple months, and they know that he's a guy that's going to be probably in play for the BMW alongside all the really big dogs. So from a ownership standpoint, compared to the NFL, what I like about golf is you can have a lot of chalky guys and still win because it may only take 1 or 2 golfers to differentiate yourself and get past the crowd. Whereas in football, typically you want to avoid chalk as much as you can. Now you can have 1 or 2, maybe 3 chalk guys in your lineup, but after that you really need to differentiate, get down, let's say, into the 4 or 5, 6%. Just because of the sheer number of players out there, that's the only way you can differentiate.
So yeah, one of the cool things about this ownership page is that you can kind of sort by different ways. You can sort by salary to kind of figure out where the good pivots are. You can sort by who's the chalkiest, but you're a big visualization guy, and you've created a pretty cool tool here to help people who like to look at data in a more visual manner look at the chalk. Could you walk us through that, explain kind of your chalk line graph, how that chalk line is calculated, and what you can do with that?
It's going to take a second to load because there's a lot of data. And the cool thing about the website is it's live, man. So what it does is it goes and it pings Fantasy National and pulls all the ownership data that's live at that moment and then calculates it, turns it up, and then bang, you got a viz on your screen. So right now, chalk line's right around 17%. And the way I calculate this is it's really kind of manual at this point. I'm not trying to do anything fancy. It's just usually I set it right around 17% because due to past events, I see that's kind of in the ballpark of chalk for me. Now, do we need to come up with an algorithm that says, chalk line is top 10 guys or chalk line is, some kind of other factors that we need to talk about? Yeah, we probably do. But right now it's pretty much manual. I'll go and set it on a weekly basis just based on what I see in the field. So, but the good thing is it's like, okay, well, I can say right below this line and look at some players that I think are going to be in my price range and kind of figure out, okay, well, these guys are going to be super low owned. We talked about Patrick Cantlay a minute ago. I mean, he's a perfect example right here. I can hover over that point and see, okay, well, there's Cantlay right now. He's projected at 11.5%, and his salary's right in my wheelhouse. That's a guy I want to have on my rosters. One of the cool things is you can kind of see pretty quickly by hovering is, okay, well, who's over here and who's in my price range, because I can look at the band right through here and see what the price range is on my players and visually inspect what the ownership's going to be like at the projection level and differentiate really quick without having to stare at a table.
Who is it that's really high up there in that 72 range?
Oh, in the 70, yeah. So Daniel Berger, this is really interesting to me. I would not expect him to be this high above the chalk line, but obviously he's had a great year. I think a lot of folks think he's due for a lot more success near at the end of the season. So it's interesting to see that his calculated ownership is this high already.
Welcome to Fantasy National Golf Club, the only resource you'll need for your golf research needs. Fantasy National Golf Club has all the information to take your golf game to the next level. Hate how you can only find season-long PGA stats? Well, we did too. At Fantasy National Golf Club, we let you sort over a large range of dates so you can locate the players with the best form over specific periods. And it's not just strokes gained numbers. Find everything from par 4 performance on specific ranges to how golfers perform in certain wind conditions and everything in between. But it's not stats and more stats. Fantasy National Golf Club has an easy-to-use daily fantasy lineup generator, years worth of data from each course, a user-friendly stat model which you can customize to your key stats and set your own weighting, plus the most interactive ownership model you've ever seen. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Fantasy National Golf Club. It's time to become a member.